In a quiet little town nestled in the heart of Texas, life unfolded at a pace that felt almost timeless. The streets were lined with old oak trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, and the air carried the faint scent of freshly baked pies from the local bakery. It was the kind of place where people knew each other by name, where neighbors waved hello, and where everyone looked out for one another. Among the cherished residents of this close-knit community was Harold Jenkins, an 80-year-old Korean War veteran whose presence brought warmth and wisdom to those around him. Harold had lived in the town for most of his life. After serving his country with pride during the Korean War, he returned home to start a family and build a peaceful life. Now widowed and retired, Harold spent his days enjoying the simple pleasures, fishing by the serene lake on the outskirts of town, tending to his garden and sharing stories with friends at the cozy diner downtown. He was known for his gentle demeanor, quick smile, and knack for spinning tales about his adventures as a young soldier. Locals often said that listening to Harold was like stepping back in time, a reminder of the sacrifices made by those who came before them. On this particular afternoon, Harold decided to visit the small grocery store near the center of town. He needed just a few essentials: a loaf of bread, some milk, and perhaps a treat or two to enjoy with his evening tea. With his trusty cane in hand, he set off on foot, taking his usual route through the tree-lined streets. The sun hung low, in the sky, casting golden rays over the rooftops and painting the world in warm hues. It seemed like any other ordinary day, but unbeknownst to Harold, it was about to take a dramatic turn. As Harold neared the corner of Main Street, he noticed a group of bikers gathered outside a nearby bar. Their motorcycles gleamed under the sunlight, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. The scene wasn't unusual. Bikers occasionally passed through town, drawn by its charm and friendly vibe. But there was something different about this group. They were loud, rowdy, and clearly enjoying themselves a bit too much. Laughter and crude jokes echoed into the street as they passed bottles among themselves, oblivious to the world around them. Harold slowed his pace slightly, not wanting to intrude on their gathering. He kept his head down, focusing on the sidewalk ahead. Still, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. There was an edge to their energy, a sense of recklessness that made him wary. Despite his unease, Harold continued walking, determined to get home, safely. What happened next would leave an indelible mark on the town and bring an unexpected hero into the spotlight. The calm rhythm of the day was about to be shattered, setting the stage for a moment that no one in the town would ever forget. Little did Harold know his quiet walk home would soon become the talk of the entire community, drawing together threads of respect, justice, and courage in ways no one could have imagined. As Harold approached the corner where the bikers were gathered, the noise from their group grew louder. Their laughter was sharp and abrasive, cutting through the peaceful hum of the afternoon. One of them, a towering figure with tattoos snaking up his arms and a leather vest that screamed rebellion, stood out among the crowd. His name was Razor, and he was the self-proclaimed leader of the group. Razor had a reputation for being tough, cocky, and quick to anger, a man who thrived on intimidation and chaos. Harold tried to stay out of their way, keeping to the edge of the sidewalk as he shuffled past. But Razor noticed him. At first it was just a glance, but then Razor's lips curled into a sneer. To him, Harold's slow, deliberate steps and reliance on a cane made him an easy target. "Hey, old-timer," Razor called out mockingly, his voice dripping with disdain. "Pick up the pace, some of us got places to be." Harold paused for a moment, gripping his cane tightly. He didn't want trouble, so he simply nodded politely and continued walking. But Razor wasn't satisfied. Emboldened by the cheers of his friends, he took a step forward, closing the gap between himself and Harold. Before anyone could react, Razor gave Harold a hard shove, sending him stumbling into the street. The cane slipped from Harold's hand, clattering loudly against the pavement. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Passers-by gasped in shock, their eyes wide with disbelief. A few people hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Harold, caught off guard by the sudden violence, struggled to regain his balance. His knees buckled slightly as he reached for his cane, his hands trembling with both fear and frustration. Razor, meanwhile, stood there laughing, clearly enjoying the spectacle he had created. "What's the matter, Gramps? Can't handle a little push?" he taunted, his words laced with cruelty. The scene was jarring not just because of the physical act itself, but because of what it represented. A blatant disregard for respect and decency. Harold wasn't just any elderly man. He was a veteran who had risked his life for his country. Yet here he was, humiliated in broad daylight by someone half his age, someone who showed no understanding of sacrifice or honor. The injustice of it burned deep within those who witnessed it. Word of the incident spread quickly. Within minutes, whispers rippled through the town. Neighbors peeked out of windows and shopkeepers stepped outside to see what all the commotion was about. Some rushed over to help Harold back onto the sidewalk, offering kind words and steady hands. Others glared at Razor and his gang, their faces etched with disapproval. Even though the bikers tried to brush it off as harmless fun, the mood in the air had shifted. What had started as a lazy afternoon had turned into something darker, something that left a bitter taste in everyone's mouths. But the story didn't end there. As fate would have it, news of the confrontation reached someone who wouldn't stand idly by while a veteran was mistreated. Someone who understood the weight of Harold's service and the importance of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. That person was none other than Chuck Norris, the legendary martial artist and actor, who happened to be visiting the town that very day. When Chuck heard about what had happened, his jaw tightened and his eyes narrowed with determination. He didn't need to think twice about what he had to do next. In the span of an hour, the peaceful rhythm of the town was shattered, only to give way to a showdown that no one saw coming. Razor may have thought his actions were inconsequential, but little did he know karma and justice was already on its way. Chuck Norris wasn't just passing through the town by chance. He was there for a reason, one deeply tied to the values he held close to his heart. That day, he had come to attend a charity event honoring local veterans, including Harold Jenkins. The event was being held at the community center, a cozy building decorated with American flags and photos of soldiers from decades past. It was a celebration of service, sacrifice, and resilience, a tribute to the men and women who had given so much for their country. Chuck had always been more than just an action star or martial artist. To many, he was a symbol of strength, humility, and unwavering respect for those who served. His connection to veterans ran deep. Over the years, he had traveled across the globe on USO tours, meeting countless brave individuals and hearing their stories. Harold Jenkins was one such individual. They had crossed paths years ago during one of Chuck's visits to a military base, and though they hadn't seen each other since, Chuck remembered Harold fondly. The elderly veteran's quiet dignity and sharp sense of humor had left a lasting impression on him. When Chuck arrived at the community center earlier that afternoon, he was greeted warmly by locals who admired not only his fame, but also his genuine kindness. He mingled effortlessly, shaking hands, sharing laughs, and listening intently as veterans recounted tales of camaraderie and courage. It was clear that Chuck wasn't there to simply make an appearance. He was fully present, engaging with everyone as if they were old friends. People felt seen and valued in his presence, and that made all the difference. But it wasn't long before whispers about the incident involving Harold reached Chuck's ears. At first, he thought it might be a misunderstanding, an exaggeration, born out of concern for the beloved veteran. But as more details emerged, the truth became undeniable. A biker had shoved Harold into the street, mocking him and showing no regard for his age or service. Each new piece of information fueled a quiet anger within Chuck. This wasn't just about Harold. It was about respecting the dignity of every human being, especially those who had sacrificed so much. Chuck excused himself from the gathering, stepping outside to gather his thoughts. The evening sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, and the cool breeze carried the faint sound of laughter from inside the center. For a moment, Chuck stood still, his mind racing. He knew what he had to do. There was no question in his mind this kind of disrespect couldn't go unanswered, not on his watch. With calm determination, Chuck approached the event organizers and explained that he needed to leave for a short while. "Something important has come up," he said simply, his tone firm yet respectful. No one pressed him for details. They trusted him implicitly. As he walked back to his rental car, Chuck felt a surge of resolve. He didn't know exactly how things would unfold, but he was prepared to face whatever lay ahead. The drive to the bar where Razor and his gang were located didn't take long. Along the way, Chuck replayed the story in his mind: the shove, the laughter, the disregard for Harold's humanity. Every detail stoked the fire of justice burning within him. By the time he parked near the bar, his expression was unreadable, a mask of quiet intensity. Chuck stepped out of the car, adjusted his jacket, and strode toward the entrance with purpose. What happened next would become the stuff of legend, a moment when a real-life hero stepped forward to defend someone who couldn't defend himself. And as Chuck pushed open the door to the dimly lit bar, the atmosphere inside shifted instantly. The rowdy bikers may not have known it yet, but their world was about to change forever, all because one man refused to let cruelty go unchecked. The bar was dimly lit, with the faint glow of neon signs casting colorful reflections on the scratched wooden tables and worn-out floorboards. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke, mingling with the rough laughter of Razor and his gang. They were loud, boisterous, and completely unaware that their careless actions earlier that day had set a chain of events into motion. For them, it was just another evening of drinking and bragging, their egos inflated by their own sense of invincibility. When Chuck Norris walked in, the room seemed to shift. At first, no one noticed him. His entrance was quiet, unassuming. But as he moved further inside, heads began to turn. It wasn't just his presence that commanded attention. It was the way he carried himself. Every step was deliberate, every movement calm but purposeful. There was an aura about him, a quiet confidence that made people stop mid-sentence and take notice. Even the jukebox in the corner seemed to fade into silence, as if the universe itself knew something significant was about to happen. Razor, seated at a table near the center of the room, was the last to look up. When he finally did, his smirk faltered for a split second before returning with even more arrogance. "Well, well," he drawled, leaning back in his chair as though trying to project dominance. "Look who decided to grace us with his presence. What's this? Some kind of celebrity visit?" Chuck didn't respond immediately. Instead, he scanned the room, taking in the scene. The half-empty bottles scattered across the tables, the bikers' leather vests adorned with patches that screamed rebellion, and the tension that now hung heavy in the air. His gaze eventually settled on Razor, locking eyes with him in a way that sent an unmistakable message. This wasn't going to end well for the biker. Finally, Chuck spoke. His voice was steady, firm, and devoid of any theatrics. "You don't mess with veterans," he said simply, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. "Especially not men like Harold Jenkins." The room went utterly still. No one dared to breathe. Razor blinked, caught off guard by both the tone and the content of Chuck's statement. He recovered quickly, though, his bravado kicking in. "Oh yeah?" he shot back, standing up to meet Chuck's gaze. "And what are you going to do about it, old man?" It was a challenge, plain and simple, and while Razor may have thought he was dealing with just another guy stepping in where he didn't belong, his friends weren't so sure. Some exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that something was different about this stranger. Others shifted, nervously in their seats, unsure whether to laugh or brace themselves for what might come next. Chuck didn't waste time responding verbally. Instead, he took a single step forward, closing the distance between himself and Razor. The biker instinctively raised his fists, clearly expecting a fight. But what happened next unfolded so quickly that most people barely had time to process it. With effortless precision, Chuck disarmed Razor, not with brute force, but with technique honed over decades of training. A swift motion here, a calculated redirection there, and suddenly Razor found himself stumbling backward, off balance and confused. Before he could regain his footing, Chuck delivered a controlled strike, a reminder, not a punishment, that left Razor reeling. The entire bar, watched in stunned silence. Razor's friends, who moments ago had been cheering him on, now sat frozen, their bravado evaporating like mist under the morning sun. Razor himself stood there, dazed and humbled, realizing too late that he had picked the wrong person to mess with. Chuck didn't gloat or escalate the situation further. Once he was certain Razor understood the gravity of his actions, he stepped back, his expression unreadable but his message crystal clear. Respect mattered, justice mattered, and no one, no matter how big or bold, was above accountability. As the reality of what had just transpired sank in, the room remained eerily quiet. All eyes were on Chuck, who turned and walked out the same way he had entered, calm, composed, and resolute. Outside, the cool night air greeted him, carrying with it the promise of peace restored, for Harold, for the town, and for anyone who believed in doing the right thing no matter the odds. The aftermath of Chuck Norris's confrontation with Razor unfolded like a scene from a movie, but this was no scripted drama. It was real life, raw and unfiltered. As Chuck stepped back after delivering his controlled yet impactful lesson, the bar remained eerily silent. The bikers, who moments ago had been laughing and boasting, now sat frozen in their seats, their bravado shattered. Even the clinking of glasses and murmurs of conversation that usually filled the space were absent, replaced by a heavy, almost suffocating stillness. Razor stood there, swaying slightly on his feet, his face a mixture of shock, pain, and disbelief. He wasn't physically injured beyond a bruised ego, but the emotional blow was far more profound. For the first time in years, maybe even decades, Razor felt truly humbled. Here he was, a man who prided himself on being tough, untouchable, and yet within seconds he had been dismantled by someone who exuded not just physical skill, but an unshakable moral authority. It wasn't just about losing a fight. It was about realizing how small and reckless he had been. Chuck didn't linger to revel in his victory. Instead, he leaned in slightly, his voice low but firm, ensuring only Razor could hear him. "This isn't about me," Chuck said, his tone calm but laced with conviction. "It's about respect. For Harold, for veterans, for people who deserve better than what you gave them today. You can laugh all you want, but actions have consequences. Don't let this be the end of your story." With that, Chuck turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Razor standing there, speechless. The other bikers watched him go, their expressions a mix of awe and unease. None of them dared to follow or say a word as Chuck disappeared through the door, his silhouette briefly illuminated by the neon sign outside before vanishing into the night. Back inside the bar, reality began to sink in for Razor and his crew. One of the bikers finally broke the silence, muttering under his breath, "Man, we messed up big time." Another chimed in, shaking his head. "Did you see that? That was Chuck Norris, like the Chuck Norris." Slowly, the weight of what had happened dawned on them. They weren't just dealing with any ordinary guy. They had crossed paths with a legend, someone who lived by principles they couldn't even comprehend. For Razor, the realization hit hardest. Sitting down heavily on a nearby chair, he buried his face in his hands, replaying the events over and over in his mind. He thought about Harold, the frail, elderly veteran he had shoved into the street without a second thought. He thought about the way the townspeople had looked at him afterward, their eyes filled with disgust and disappointment. And he thought about Chuck, whose every move had been deliberate, not out of anger, but out of a desire to teach a lesson. That lesson wasn't lost on Razor. Deep down, he knew he had acted cruelly and selfishly. He had treated Harold like he was invisible, like his service and sacrifice meant nothing. But now, thanks to Chuck, he understood the gravity of his actions and the opportunity he had to make things right. As the hours passed, Razor made a decision. He couldn't undo what he had done, but he could take responsibility for it. The next morning, he visited the local hospital where Harold had gone after the incident. Though Harold hadn't sustained serious injuries, he had needed medical attention for a minor sprain caused by the fall. When Razor walked into the room, Harold looked up, surprised to see him. "I'm sorry," Razor said, his voice trembling. with genuine remorse. "I shouldn't have done what I did. You didn't deserve that. No one does." He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to say it anyway. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Harold studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Apology accepted," he said simply, his voice steady. "But remember, actions speak louder than words. Show me you mean it." From that day forward, Razor kept his promise. He began volunteering at the local Veterans Center, helping organize events and lending a hand wherever needed. Over time, he earned back some measure of trust, not just from Harold but from the entire community. And though he would never forget the lesson Chuck Norris taught him, he also learned something else. Redemption was possible, even for someone like him. Meanwhile, news of Chuck's intervention spread throughout the town, sparking conversations about respect, accountability, and the power of standing up for others. What started as a single act of courage became a catalyst for change, proving that sometimes all it takes is one person to remind us of what truly matters. The ripple effects of Chuck Norris's intervention didn't stop at Razor's apology or his newfound commitment to change. What happened that day became a defining moment for the entire town, sparking conversations and inspiring actions that reached far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. It wasn't just about one man standing up for another. It was about the values they represented: respect, honor, and justice. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. By the next morning, nearly everyone in the small Texas town knew about what had transpired at the bar. Local news outlets picked up the story, dubbing it "The Day Chuck Norris Taught a Biker Respect." Social media posts went viral, with people from all over the country sharing their admiration for Chuck's actions. Memes began circulating online, light-hearted yet meaningful tributes to the legendary martial artist who had once again proven himself as more than just an action star. One popular post read, "Chuck Norris doesn't knock on doors. He stands near them and they open out of respect." But the impact wasn't limited to jokes and headlines. The story resonated deeply with many, especially veterans and their families. For Harold Jenkins, the attention was overwhelming, but also heartwarming. Strangers sent letters and gifts, thanking him for his service and expressing gratitude for the reminder of the sacrifices made by men and women like him. Neighbors stopped by his house daily, offering kind words and home-cooked meals. Even the local diner renamed its signature pie Harold's Honor Pie, donating a portion of the proceeds to veteran charities. As for Razor, his transformation became a focal point of discussion. People were skeptical at first. After all, he had been the antagonist in this story. But as weeks turned into months, his efforts to make amends spoke louder than his past mistakes. He started attending community meetings, listening intently to stories shared by veterans and learning about the challenges they faced after returning home. He organized fundraisers to support programs that provided housing and job training for former soldiers. Slowly but surely, Razor earned the trust of those around him, including Harold, who eventually invited him to join a fishing trip at the lake. Chuck Norris, meanwhile, continued to visit the town whenever he could. His bond with Harold grew stronger with each passing visit. They spent hours talking about everything from military history to favorite fishing spots, their friendship becoming a testament to the power of connection across generations. Chuck often joked that Harold gave him tips on how to catch bigger fish, while Harold quipped that Chuck's fame scared away any competition at the lake. Inspired by the events, other towns began organizing initiatives to support veterans and combat bullying. Schools introduced programs focused on teaching students the importance of respect and empathy. Community leaders held workshops aimed at fostering understanding between different groups, using Chuck's actions as a real-life example of standing up for what's right. The phrase "be more like Chuck" became a rallying cry, a simple yet powerful call to action. Even Razor found himself playing a role in these broader changes. Once seen as a symbol of recklessness, he now stood as proof that people can grow and change when given the chance. He became a mentor for troubled youth, sharing his story and encouraging them to channel their energy into positive pursuits. "I used to think being tough meant pushing others around," he told a group of teenagers during one session. "But real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down." For Harold, the events brought a renewed sense of purpose. Though he had always been proud of his service, he now felt a deeper connection to his community. Knowing that his experience had inspired so many filled him with gratitude and joy. And for Chuck, the entire ordeal reinforced why he had dedicated his life to honoring veterans and promoting kindness. In the end, what started as a single act of courage transformed not only the lives of those directly involved, but also the fabric of the community itself. The town became known not just for its picturesque charm, but for its unwavering commitment to respect and compassion. And though Chuck Norris eventually returned to his busy life, his legacy lived on, a reminder that, even in the face of cruelty, there will always be heroes ready to step forward and remind us of what truly matters. The story of Chuck Norris stepping in to defend Harold Jenkins didn't just stay within the borders of the small Texas town. It spread far and wide, touching hearts and sparking action across the country. What began as a local incident quickly became a symbol of something much larger: the enduring importance of respect, accountability, and standing up for those who cannot defend themselves. The ripple effects of that single day continued to grow, inspiring people from all walks of life to reflect on their own values and actions. Local news outlets were the first to pick up the story, publishing articles that captured the drama of the confrontation at the bar and the heartfelt apology Razor offered to Harold. But it wasn't long before national media took notice. Talk shows, morning news programs, and even late-night comedians began discussing the event. Clips of Chuck's legendary career played alongside interviews with townspeople who had witnessed the aftermath. One host quipped, "Leave it to Chuck Norris to remind us all what true heroism looks like. No special effects required." Social media amplified the story even further. Hashtags like "Respect your veterans" and "Be more like Chuck" trended for days, with millions sharing posts about the incident. People posted photos of their own veteran family members expressing gratitude for their service and calling attention to the challenges many veterans face after returning home. Others shared stories of times they had stood up or wished they had for someone being mistreated. The message was clear: acts of courage, no matter how small, can have a profound impact. Schools across the nation seized the opportunity to use the story as a teaching moment. Teachers incorporated it into lessons about empathy, respect, and civic responsibility. In classrooms, students debated questions like, "What would you do if you saw someone being treated unfairly?" Or, "How can we show appreciation for those who serve our country?" Some schools invited veterans to speak about their experiences, while others organized drives to collect donations for veteran support organizations. One elementary school even held a kindness week, encouraging kids to perform random acts of kindness in honor of Harold and Chuck's example. Communities outside the town also drew inspiration from the events. In neighboring cities, residents organized parades and ceremonies to honor veterans, drawing record attendance. Local businesses pledged portions of their profits to charities supporting military families. A group of college students launched a campaign called Operation Gratitude, writing thank you letters to veterans and sending care packages to active duty soldiers overseas. Each gesture, big or small, reinforced the idea that respect isn't just an individual choice, it's a collective responsibility. Even Razor's redemption arc became a source of motivation for many. His journey from bully to ally demonstrated that change is possible when people are willing to take responsibility for their actions. Razor himself became a reluctant spokesperson of sorts, speaking at community events and sharing his story with groups struggling with issues like bullying and prejudice. He often ended his talks with a simple yet powerful statement: "It's never too late to do the right thing. All it takes is one step in the right direction." For Harold, the widespread recognition brought both pride and humility. Though he appreciated the outpouring of love and support, he remained grounded, reminding everyone that the real heroes were the men and women who had served alongside him. "I'm just one person," he'd say with a smile. "But if my story helps people remember the sacrifices so many have made, then I'm grateful." As for Chuck Norris, he stayed true to his humble nature, brushing off praise and focusing instead on the bigger picture. In interviews, he emphasized that the credit belonged not to him but to the values he stood for. "This isn't about me," he said repeatedly. "It's about honoring those who've given so much and reminding ourselves that we all have a role to play in creating a better world." In the end, the story transcended its origins, becoming more than just a tale of justice served. It became a movement, a call to action for communities everywhere to come together, celebrate their heroes, and strive for a culture rooted in kindness and respect. And though the initial spark came from a single act of courage, the fire it ignited burned brightly, lighting the way for countless others to follow. Years passed, but the story of Chuck Norris and Harold Jenkins remained a cherished part of the town's history, a tale told and retold with pride. It wasn't just a story about one man standing up for another. It was a reminder of the enduring power of respect, honor, and human connection. The events that unfolded on that fateful day left an indelible mark, not only on those directly involved, but also on the generations that followed. Harold continued to live his quiet, peaceful life in the same cozy house he had called home for decades. Though he never sought attention or fame, he embraced the opportunities the story brought to shine a light on veterans' issues. He became a beloved figure in the community, often seen fishing by the lake or sitting at the diner sharing stories with friends. His gentle wisdom and unwavering kindness inspired everyone around him. Even as his hair turned whiter and his steps grew slower, Harold remained a pillar of strength, a living testament to resilience and grace. Chuck Norris visited whenever his busy schedule allowed, always making time to sit down with Harold and swap tales over coffee or pie. Their friendship blossomed into something deeper than admiration. It was built on mutual respect and shared values. For Chuck, these visits were a chance to reconnect with what mattered most: family, service, and humility. Locals loved seeing them together, often remarking how their bond felt like a bridge between two eras, the rugged determination of the past meeting the hopeful promise of the future. As for Razor, his transformation was nothing short of remarkable. Once known as a reckless troublemaker, he reinvented himself as a mentor and advocate for positive change. He worked tirelessly to support veterans, organizing fundraisers, volunteering at shelters, and speaking openly about his own mistakes as a way to encourage others to do better. Over time, people stopped seeing him as the biker who shoved Harold and started viewing him as someone who had learned from his errors and dedicated his life to making amends. Even Harold came to see Razor as a friend, often inviting him along on fishing trips where they would talk for hours about life, forgiveness, and second chances. The ripple effects of that day extended far beyond the town's borders. Schools across the country adopted lessons based on the story, teaching children about empathy, accountability, and the importance of standing up for others. Veterans organizations reported an increase in donations and volunteer sign-ups, crediting the renewed focus on honoring those who served. Communities nationwide began hosting annual Respect Your Heroes Days, celebrating not just military veterans, but all individuals who make sacrifices for the greater good: teachers, first responders, healthcare workers, and more. Even pop culture kept the memory alive. Documentaries were made about the incident, highlighting its impact on the town and beyond. Books were written, songs were composed, and murals depicting Chuck, Harold, and Razor working together adorned walls in cities miles away. The phrase "be more like Chuck" became a lasting mantra, symbolizing courage, integrity, and compassion. For Harold, the greatest reward was knowing that his experience had sparked meaningful change. On his 90th birthday, the town threw him a grand celebration, complete with a parade, speeches, and a plaque dedicating the local park in his name. As he stood there surrounded by loved ones, Harold reflected on the journey that had brought him here. "I'm just a simple man," he said, his voice steady and warm. "But if my story can remind people to treat each other with kindness and respect, then I've lived a good life." Chuck Norris, now older but still radiating strength and humility, attended the celebration alongside Razor, who helped organize the event. Watching the three of them together, Harold smiling brightly, Chuck offering a firm handshake, and Razor laughing alongside old friends, was a powerful reminder of how far they'd all come. It was proof that even in moments of conflict and regret, there is always room for growth, understanding, and redemption. And so, the legacy of that day endured, not because of the confrontation itself, but because of the lessons it taught. It showed that heroes aren't defined by their fists or fame, but by their hearts. It demonstrated that respect isn't given. It's earned through actions both big and small. And it reminded everyone that no matter how dark things may seem, there will always be light waiting to break through, if we're willing to let it.